All right, we are recording. So Nathan, thanks so much for taking the time to connect today.
Hey, good to be with you, Jake.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So you're calling in from Boston, right?
No,
No,
New
East
Orleans,
Coast.
Louisiana.
New Orleans. I knew that because you
Beautiful
went
New Orleans. That's where Current Affairs is headquartered. I moved here
here.
7 years ago.
Yeah,
I
awesome.
fled Boston.
Why? It's warmer in Louisiana.
It is nice. It is nice and warm down here. I don't have to dig my car out of the snow. People are nice here. They are mean in Boston. And I like the architecture. And I just wanted to open our magazine's offices in my favorite city.
Was there anything? Was it because it's just a nice city, or was there anything special about New Orleans? Because it seems like there's like the popular southern cities would be Charlotte or Austin.
I guess
I
I had worked here for summer, and I just fell in love with the city. So I just vowed after I had worked here, I was like, someday I shall move back there.
Got it.
Very special place. The people who love it here, they really love it here.
Yeah, and you're one of them.
I am one of them. I could never live anywhere else.
So you came down there the first time 7 years ago?
Yeah, I moved here 7 years ago to open the magazine offices.
Got it. So let's talk about that. So you run Current Affairs. You are the chief editor at Current Affairs, and
right.
you have really built that publication out to become the widely recognized outlet resource that it is today. Can you tell us about that journey?
Sure.
Your educational journey and how that parlayed into your work today at Current Affairs.
Well, you and I both went to Brandeis together as undergraduates, and after that, I graduated 2 years before you, I guess. I went off to law school thinking I was going to be a lawyer, which I thought since middle school, I guess. Turned out I didn't want to be a lawyer, and so I stayed in grad school. And in grad school, I thought I wanted to be an academic, and then I realized I didn't want to be an academic either, and I realized I liked doing political writing for a popular audience. And so while I was in grad school, I thought it would be really cool to try having my own publication. So I produced a prototype issue, and the prototype issue came out all right. So we did a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter in 2015 that got us $16,000, which was enough to print one issue, and got us our first few subscribers. So we started going, and it just took off.
Wow. When you say grad school, what did that mean, grad school?
I was in the PhD program in social policy and sociology at Harvard. And I stayed the bare minimum amount of time until they allow you to go and do your studies from elsewhere. And that's when I left.
Grad school is a very humble way to put it. I feel like most people try to emphasize, if you went to Harvard, you're supposed to emphasize you went to Harvard.
Yes, but it's a loathsome and repulsive place, and I don't want to. I'm not too proud to be associated with it.
What's so loathsome about it?
Oh, I don't know. It was just I really didn't have a great time there. I just found it very alienating and elitist, and I didn't feel like anything I did there was useful to anyone.
Oh, only that.
Yeah, just that. Everything else was fine.
Wow.
Everything else I really enjoyed.
So you went to law school. Where'd you go to law school?
I was at Yale Law School.
Okay. Some small, unknown law school.
Yeah, in the middle of nowhere, Connecticut.
Yeah. So you went to Yale Law School thinking you're going to be a lawyer. What made you decide not to become a lawyer?
I went. My classmates were J.D. Vance and Vivek Ramaswamy.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, there might have been 1 year above our head, but they were there at the same time.
Wow. Huh. Did you know them well, or?
We produced some real winners. No, but I have a bunch of emails from Vivek Ramaswamy. We used to have like a law school listserv where everyone could email anyone. So I have a bunch of things where he's asking for like rides and people to go play tennis and all sorts of things. So I was looking through there when he was running for president, seeing if there was any dirt I could leak to the press, but it's all very innocuous.
Wow. You could probably reply to one of those, and maybe he'd get it though, because it would be on an existing thread.
I know. Well, I tried to get him on the Current Affairs podcast, but his people did not reply. Probably wise of them, because it would have been a hostile interview.
I was going to say they probably didn't reply because it would be too boring for him to talk to someone with the same exact views as him. you know.
Yeah, no, that's
Uh,
right. That's right. What would we have found to
right.
even discuss,
You just say
considering how
ditto the
close
whole
we are?
time, and
Oh
then
yeah, yeah. The three
yeah.
cops in every school platform. That love that.
Yeah. So, what kind of lawyer did you want to be? And then, when at Yale did you decide you do not want to be a lawyer?
Well, when I grew up in Florida, and in Florida I did a thing as a teenager called the teen court, and the teen court is where you go and you're basically you're sort of a real lawyer because you're taking real cases as a teenager for the it's like a juvenile diversion program with all teenagers running the court. So it's got your jury of your actual peers and teenage lawyers presenting the cases, and then your other teenagers give you the little sentence. This is like if it's your first crime. They instead of sending you the real court, they send you the teen court. So I was an attorney. I was a defense attorney in the teen court, and so I always thought I wanted to do criminal defense. So I interned at the New Orleans Public Defender, but I realized that I didn't like being a criminal defense attorney because most of the time, you're making a very limited impact, and that all you can do is like decide whether this one person goes to jail or not, and that's kind of important for them. But you basically have no chance of making any broader structural reforms. Like if you take the system as a given and then you're trying to help this one person navigate it. And I always want to like push things. I'm a utopian. I want to like present alternative visions and new ideas, and that's really not possible if you're working at the New Orleans Public Defender's Office. So then I thought I wanted to be an ACLU lawyer, and I worked at the ACLU for a summer, and on class action cases against prisons. It was a little closer to what I wanted to do, but it was still very frustrating because the class actions took forever. They didn't accomplish very much. And I thought, gosh, I don't know if I could spend my life doing this either.
So, really, for you, is about being able to make an impact at the societal policy level, and you felt that being a lawyer is really limited to like this client or this suit. I mean, there are lawyers that make, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Like there are people who are able to find ways to practice law in ways that impact society at large. But I guess but I think what you're saying is like that's just not the case for most lawyers. Like most lawyers
know. I mean, yes, I considered impact litigation. I decided against it in part because the other thing I didn't like about being a lawyer is that you're constantly saying things you don't believe. So meaning that you can really believe in the client, you can really believe that the case is going to have a good outcome, but the argument that you have to make in a court is essentially often a dishonest one because you're arguing about the law. So let's say I believe that, I believe in the right to an abortion, let's say, which I do. If I was arguing in a court in an abortion rights case, what I would be arguing is that a particular statute that appears to limit the right to abortion actually doesn't limit it. That might be the kind of argument I would be making in a case, or I would be making a case that there should be an exception under the statute, and I would be making an issue of statutory, or I would say the legislators were vague in this statute, or historically this right, and essentially I have to make whatever argument about the facts and the law is convenient in order to serve the ends of the particular cause or client. And I really didn't like that because it ends up with like you make just whatever the interpretation of the statute most favorable to your client is, rather than whatever your honest opinion is. So there's kind of like in the profession, by the nature of what you're doing, is like an inherent need to do some, if not dishonesty, then at least like your opinions are opportunistic.
Yeah, you're not reaping like what's true in your heart. You're speaking on behalf
the client.
Objective.
Yeah, you might make the opposite argument tomorrow than you made today.
Yeah, and you're giving an example where you agree with the client, but there's also cases where you think that the client is scum of the earth, and you still have to defend him, and then that's right. Really a moral conflict. So that makes sense. So you went to Yale Law School, you decided, you know what, I want to make more of a impact on a societal level. I want to be able to work for something I believe in. I want to be able to say my views and say my views. And then you got your PhD at Harvard. What was the intention there? Did you know you were going to start a successful magazine?
No, I mean, I was a bit adrift in grad school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was in social policy and sociology, as I said. I was doing some research on like landlord tenant courts and prison education programs, which was very interesting. But I started doing more political writing. So I started a blog, and I started contributing freelance articles to like the New Republic and Salon and a couple of other places, just political commentary. And I like doing the political commentary. But I wanted kind of more freedom. I mean, I liked the blog the most because it just gave me complete freedom. But I've also always liked design and art. And so the idea of a magazine was, well, what if I could combine my kind of interest in design and art with my desire to have like a big free venue where I could just say whatever I want.
Awesome. And how'd you get that off the ground? Because so you left law school, went to the PhD thinking, okay, I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I know that these things interest me. I know. And then along the way, you started the magazine. There is no shortage of media outlets, right?
Yeah.
How did you create something that successfully competed, took part of the market share, gained a significant following?
Well,
I know that you do a lot of content creation yourself as well. Like that's a lot of work that you're putting into it.
yeah.
And, yeah.
Well, the thing is, I tried to make something that had a reason for existing, right? That wasn't just like everything else. So, like as far as left-wing magazines go, there was Jacobin, but I thought the thing we would put together would be a little more fun and funny and kind of satirical and just about some kind of different topics than Jacobin. And I thought that the prototype for the magazine made it clear what the difference would be. The thing is, we didn't need that many people to read us in order to stay alive. And the thing that mattered to me was just keeping it alive. So it really, for us, was a matter of like, okay, we don't need to take a visible amount of market share. We just need enough people to subscribe to where we can pay for the next edition. So just having a few thousand people.
But for you, but it's not just that, right? Because you're trying to build a career out of it and pay for your, this, and then have it. So is the bar?
Yeah, but all I have to do is
the bar was
pay to. All I have to do is pay enough to survive on.
Yeah.
So essentially, it didn't require that much money to be able to continue doing it.
Got it.
So that's always been the secret to our success, is keep costs low. Because if you keep a lot of these publications that die, they overspend. There was this massive catastrophe with this publication called The Messenger recently, where they hired 300 people straight out of the gate, and they had just tens of millions of dollars of expenses, and it was very obvious from the get-go. And they were a real extreme example of a catastrophic media failure, and they went out of business. But there are plenty of other examples where places just are, they have too many people working for them, or they're just spending too much on rent, or they are just that the subscriptions are just not paying for the expenses. And so we thought, well, let's keep the expenses low. For a long time, we had no employees. I was doing it on a volunteer basis. Then I was kind of the only employee. And then we just paid freelance people. And we always paid for all of the writing and art. I made that a principle from day one. We would never have free writing or art, but we didn't pay very much. We just paid what we could. And we try to put that up all the time, but I was always very, very cautious about, okay, well, if we keep it really, really cheap to produce this thing, then we don't actually have to grow that huge of an audience in order for it to survive.
That's interesting. And a lot of outlets burn out because their ambitions are so high and they're pouring all this money in. And you're saying, look, we want this to exist. We want to keep it afloat.
And so this to exist.
Yeah.
That's all it needs, is to continue to exist.
You said something interesting, which was that, I said, how do you compete with all these media outlets? And what you said was that we wanted to make something that had a reason for existing. That's not just like everything.
I guess that is implicitly insulting to everyone else.
So what is the reason for current affairs existing, in your view?
Oh, well, the world is very bleak. And there's a lot of people who were sort of in my generation who were depressed and hopeless and they saw a lot of things wrong, but they didn't know what to do about them, or they didn't know how to articulate their feelings about them. One of the things that we do, especially in our print edition, which is full of art and full of comics and stuff, is we simultaneously help people articulate things that they felt but couldn't express, and we also give them a sense of reassurance and hope and a vision for how things could be different. So oftentimes what we're doing with our articles is we're saying, well, okay, you think that this perspective is wrong, but maybe if you were pushed, you wouldn't be able to explain why you think it's wrong. So here, let's go through the evidence. Let's look at it. Let's help us understand, why you probably stand the way you do on this issue, but let's also look at the counter arguments. So let's challenge your position. So I think our job is to help people. I call it like teaching critical thinking a lot of the time. So our articles are often very long because we're going through, forensically analyzing different quotations. If we do an article about, say, like responding to a PragerU video, we'll go through it bit by bit, and we'll go, okay, well, here's the evidence they get. Here's what they said follows from the evidence, and here's why this doesn't work. Okay, but here's what they'd say about why it does work. Well, here's why that doesn't hold up either. So helping teach people critical thinking and analysis skills is a really important part of what we do.
That's awesome, and I feel like there is a deep need for that.
Yeah.
In society and in the media, and as opposed to clickbait and stuff where it's sensational, to actually compel readers and viewers to dig deeper and understand how to reason through different arguments. That's great. More people should read, current affairs for that reason.
I agree.
Yeah. So on that note, what are your political views, generally speaking? Like, how do you identify politically? Are you a liberal? Are you a Democrat?
Well, I wrote a book called Why You Should Be a Socialist. So
okay,
I think probably I have to describe myself as a libertarian socialist, which is a term I like because it sounds contradictory in American political parlance, but it actually has a long tradition of being the libertarian socialist, which is people who believe in economic equality but also are pretty skeptical of state power.
People who believe in economic equality, but are pretty skeptical of state power. Tell me more about this view, and also tell me about how did you adopt this view? Like, what was it along the journey? Was it in Yale Law School? Was it during your PhD at Harvard? Was it back at Brandeis? Was it before that? When did you embrace this as your viewpoint?
I had a turning point at Brandeis, actually, that I usually cite, which is I took a class with a professor named Mark Hulling in history department. It was a class called Marxism and Anarchism, Red Flags and Black Flags. And that class was amazing to me because, I was and am still skeptical of Marxism and Marxist socialism, because I think that Marxist socialists have a tendency to believe... I gotta be careful how I say this because they always complain about any way you characterize them. Have a tendency to believe in a large, powerful state, and I think that's one of the reasons why Marxist governments become quite authoritarian. But then this professor Mark Hulling taught us about these other socialists who'd always been arguing with the Marxists and saying, well, it's true that the basic Marxist analysis, which is that it's unfair for a very small number of people to control a huge amount of the wealth in society, and for some people to work really hard all their lives and earn basically no money and be, abused and mistreated by their bosses. These things are indeed unfair, but the response to it can't be to establish an authoritarian state. And so the anarchists were were making all of the criticisms of the Marxists that I thought were very powerful, but they were doing so while still being on the left and sharing a basic kind of socialist framework and believing in the labor movement. And so I would never describe myself as an anarchist today, probably, but I thought, oh, well, this kind of captures where I want to go with my politics, which is I simultaneously I believe in individual freedom, but I think there's something fundamentally wrong about the vision of freedom put forth by people like Milton Friedman, who say that basically freedom means that corporations should be able to do whatever they want.
And this ideology, this became appealing to you starting at Brandeis with this professor that you mentioned. That's when the ideas first. you were drawn to them. So like this is just a anecdotal random. Who'd you vote for? You know, are you more Bernie Sanders? Like if we were to really try
Yeah.
to force you to fit into one of these, you know, two
Oh, you don't need to
buckets.
force me. I was very pro Bernie.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, I wrote one of the big the Italian Times when our magazine really took off was in 2016, just after we'd started. I wrote an article that was saying that Trump was probably going to be the president, and if the Democrats nominated Hillary Clinton, and that if the Democrats wanted to beat Trump, they should nominate Bernie Sanders, because I thought that Bernie Sanders didn't have some of Hillary Clinton's unique weaknesses against Trump. And that was an article we published in February 2016. That article went viral for us, you know, viral for a politics article. It's not, you know, doesn't necessarily mean it was mainstream, but I got on Democracy Now! And it got us a bunch of subscribers to the magazine. But throughout that campaign, we were pretty pro Bernie, often just making pragmatic arguments like that one, because that is literally just an argument that if you want to beat Trump, you should nominate Bernie. It's not actually an affirmative argument for Bernie's agenda, but I also liked a lot of what Bernie's agenda was. And I think if you look back at my coverage of Bernie over time, you'll see that of all the presidential candidates there have been in my lifetime, I'm probably more pro Bernie than anyone else.
Wow. Who's going to win this in this next election?
Well, it's very hard to say. I don't think you can know. I think if it were held today, I think at the moment Trump is the favorite, but things can change. There's a lot of unpredictable things that I don't know about. I've tried to hold back on making predictions because in 2020 I thought Trump would win re-election and he didn't. That's in part because the pandemic happened in between me saying that he was going to win re-election and the actual election. So sometimes there's a pandemic, and everything you thought was true suddenly gets turned upside down. And but what I would say is that there are dangerous signs that the Democratic Party is not campaigning very well, that the Biden campaign isn't, and that Joe Biden has weaknesses, such as the fact that he's really old, that are insurmountable.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see if there's another pandemic or what happens. So a few weeks ago, you interviewed Destiny. For those who don't know, Destiny is, how do I say this in a sentence? He sort of rose up as a gamer and a streamer, and now he's very much in the limelight in the podcast streaming world, and is I think a preeminent debater nowadays on certain political issues. And so you spoke to him for I think a couple hours, about Israel-Palestine. So I have some follow-up questions on that, but I guess at a high level, I mean, how did you feel that went, and how do you feel about him and the nature of the conversation?
I don't care for him. I found that I mean, the whole thing began because I'd sent a very disparaging tweet about him, and he had said, you want to come on and debate me? Because he has sort of admitted that he's never read a book on the Israel-Palestine conflict, but he has very strong opinions on the Israel-Palestine conflict. I don't think you should be a prominent public intellectual on a subject unless you do some deep reading and reflection. And he had some argument with Ben Shapiro, and I was just saying that watching it seemed like my personal idea of hell. And he saw this and got mad.
What did you say specifically? What did you say specifically, though?
I said something like watching two supremely overconfident men with a sub-Wikipedia knowledge of foreign policy discussing it for 2 hours straight is my personal idea of hell. Yeah. I don't know if that's an exact quotation, but that's my best great memory of what I said. And he's well, you want to come back that up? So I went on his program. We had a discussion. It was not very productive because he has a technique, which is that he just speaks very, very, very quickly. So he says, a ton of things, and you can't really unpack all of them. And so you just frantically trying to respond as you can. But I actually think I did pretty well. Some of his supporters emailed me afterwards, and they said, I thought you did well against Destiny. I'll be following your magazine now. So that was nice. So it was a real positive for me. And the the comments section wasn't too vicious. The usual things about like, what is this guy's ridiculous accent? But other than that, it went okay. It went okay. I felt all right.
I thought it was a great debate. I thought you did really well in expressing your points. So let me dig a little deeper into something you said and ask a follow up on that. You mentioned a couple of his tactics that are annoying, right? You said that he talks really quickly, kind of throws all these ideas at you.
Yeah.
That's one, I guess, tactic. And then another, I don't know if you call it tactic, but the idea that he's not very well read on the subject. So to me, those are comments about like how he's expressing his viewpoints. My
Sure.
question is separate from the tactics or his knowledge base.
Yeah.
Like, looking back, what do you think are the actual ideas or points that he
Well,
made that you guys disagree with? Or because
yeah.
here's kind of what's underneath my question is I see a lot of these debates where you have two seemingly intelligent, educated people on both sides that a lot of times are actually unbiased, or at least have no overt intention of being biased. And these two people can't converge on a set of facts as it pertains to the issue. And I'm trying to figure out why that is. And so my
Sure.
question to you is, in the case of
Yeah.
Destiny, sorry that this is a little verbose how I'm phrasing this, but what were the arguments that he made where you feel
Well,
like he
I
said,
Yeah, and people should, you can look up the article that I wrote after this, which I called My Date with Destiny. Because what I did there was, in fact, I answered this question over the course of 7,000 words, this exact question, which is I said, okay, look, I found this conversation frustrating because in these sort of things, you're just kind of yelling at each other. What are the key points that I think that he's wrong about? What were we actually arguing about, and why, and what do I think the evidence is? So one of the big ones was Destiny has cast doubt consistently on whether there is a starvation problem in Gaza, and so I quoted all of the evidence from lots of different sources disproving what a number of things that he's said and showing why I think he's wrong to wave it away and go, well, people have always been saying that Gaza is starving. They said that before October 7th. I said, well, no. What people have said before is that there's food insecurity, that that Gazans are given a limited amount of calories, but not that they're starving. Now they are actually starving in many parts of Gaza. At the time, there had been documented deaths from starvation. I just think I think it's deeply morally wrong when there's a big crisis that needs to be alleviated to basically not even discuss the evidence. And he asked me things like, he said to me, well, are there any human rights organizations that have accused Israel of blocking aid? And in fact, there are. And I sent him a report, which was by Refugees International, on the various ways that they say that Israel obstructs aid to Gaza. So that is a point of factual disagreement. It's not about technique. It's not about knowledge base. It's a place where I think he's wrong, and I think that his being wrong and spreading the perspective that he does active harm, because if he manages to convince people of his perspective, they're going to care less about what I think is a pretty urgent humanitarian crisis. And then, as I say, the article that I did is 7,000 words, so I went through lots of the other issues that we disagreed with over the course, not all of them, because there were a lot, because he talks very quickly, but I went through some of the core ones, and I laid out, with quotations from him, this is what he thinks, this is what I think, and this is why I think you should believe me over him.
I think we should read that article, My Date
Yeah.
with Destiny. So I'll get to that after this this call. Are there, because it does seem that and you've seen this like on the Lex interview, when you have Benny Morris, who knows more on this than Destiny does. Benny Morris talking to Finkelstein about the issue, and like, do you have experts on both sides that do seem to kind of be able to pick into some of the, like, even the finer details, like what happened at the specific negotiations at the Oslo Accords, at what was the agreement, and how much land, and where was the land, and who said what? Those seem like important facts that people don't agree on. You see them. Do you think that's a matter like of destiny being uneducated, or like I guess how do you explain someone like Benny Morris being not seeing things the way
Well,
you like,
I actually
where is Benny Morris like wrong? You know,
well,
for
one of the so Benny Morris is an interesting case because I don't actually think there are many facts that Benny Morris and Norman Finkelstein disagree on that are just sort of facts about the world. I think that their interpretations of the facts are what they differ on. Benny Morris is a pretty well-respected historian. In fact, Norman Finkelstein quotes Benny Morris extensively in his own work. I quote Benny Morris a lot. I think I've probably quoted him in the Date with Destiny article. I quote him as an authority on the facts. Where I think Finkelstein and Morris differ is the story that they tell about the facts. And where I've listened to a lot of interviews with Benny Morris, and oftentimes where I think he goes wrong is not that he is stating incorrect facts, but I mean they are kind of incorrect facts. But I would say that what I see, and I mean, if I wrote a whole article, I'd go through and give exact quotations from him. But the impression that I get of him is that he doesn't know many Palestinians. He hasn't spoken to many Palestinians. He's read a lot of history, but he often uses Israeli sources, a little less on the Palestinian sources. And as a result, I think he has a bigotry towards Palestinians, in that I think he gives their perspective less credence than he gives to Israeli perspectives. I think that he also holds stereotypes about Palestinians. I think he thinks of them as violent and fanatical. He has an interview from 2004 from the New Left Review where he's talking about ethnic cleansing. And he essentially endorses ethnic cleansing. He says that the mistake that Ben-Gurion made when Israel was founded was not to ethnically cleanse the whole territory, because he says that the Arabs in what would become the state of Israel were a fifth column. And so that is, they were suspicious, they were disloyal, and they would ultimately destroy the state of Israel. And Benny Morris has said in that same interview, I think that perhaps in the future we will need more ethnic cleansing. It may be that the Palestinians just have to go because they want to make war on Israel. They want to destroy the state of Israel. They are basically fanatically anti-Zionist. Now, Benny Morris and Norman Finkelstein do not really disagree that much on exactly what happened in 1948. They do have a disagreement over what the morality of ethnic cleansing would be, because Benny Morris, as I say, defends it explicitly. He says basically it was necessary, whereas Norman Finkelstein says it was an atrocity. That's a moral difference, or a disagreement. It may be a disagreement about moral facts, but it's a sort of philosophical disagreement. And I think that Benny Morris's inherent suspicion of Palestinians, because I really do think whenever I hear him talk about Palestinians, I hear him talk about them with kind of old-fashioned, what Edward Said would call Orientalist stereotypes about about vicious, pathological, anti-Semitic Arabs. And I think that Benny Morris's view of Palestinians, which I think would be corrected if he had spent a lot more time around Palestinians, which as I say, I suspect he hasn't spent that much time in his life hanging around, talking to, just working alongside. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that the stereotypes are what causes the things upon which I disagree and Norman Finkelstein disagrees with Benny Morris. And so that means that's how you reconcile the fact that I think he's a very good and honest historian who recounts the facts accurately. I think Righteous Victims, is full of excellent evidence. Birth of the Palestinian refugee problem is full of very good and sound evidence. He's very honest in his interpretation of the sources, but that's how you reconcile that with still disagreeing very profoundly about the conflict.
Wow. So what you're saying is that even though they agree on much, if not all of the facts, the underlying bias and emotion, that's the difference. And he has this bias and dislike for Palestinians, and that drives a lot of his.
I think so. I think that's true.
I
I
will
think he
ask.
has a well. I would. There's a more positive way I could phrase it, which is that I also think he has an emotional attachment to the state of Israel. I think he has a bias because I think he is very compelled by the story of the state of Israel, that he does see things through the lens of being an Israeli. The Israeli national narrative is often like we are besieged on all sides by people who hate us and want to destroy us. I think he believes that, and so evidence that challenges that, evidence of moderation on the other side, or evidence of legitimate grievances on the other side, is more difficult for him to process, just because of what his loyalties are, what his upbringing is, and how he views the world.
And in that sense, it's a disservice to him, these loyalties that he has, or is it disservice to like it's
Yeah.
I think
Well,
I think you would say that it's unfortunate that he has these views ultimately because it
and it does. Yeah, it does corrupt his interpretation of the evidence sometimes, and you saw it in the debate with Finkelstein and Destiny and Moin Rabbani, because there was a part where Finkelstein confronted Benny Morris about the fact that in his book, I forget which of the books, Righteous Victims or both of he said that the idea of transferring Arabs from the state of Israel was inbuilt to Zionism, and he sort of denied or soft pedaled that in the debate. And I actually went through the chapter 2 of Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Parliament Revisited, and in fact, he lays out a lot of evidence in that basically that ethnic cleansing was a major part of what Zionists in the before the state of Israel understood they would have to do, that he kind of denied in the debate, because I think that he's a really, Benny Morris in particular is a really interesting character, because I think he's very, very conflicted, because sometimes he'll say like, yes, ethnic cleansing was part of the program, and then he'll say, no, it wasn't. And I actually do think there are actual contradictions in things that he has said from point A to point B, contradictions that can be explained by two poles within his thinking, which is the pole of being a very serious, rigorous, committed historian, and his being a loyal patriot of the state of Israel.
And I heard one of those contradictions brought up in that debate when Finkelstein kept going back to this passage of the writing in which he described how part of Zionism necessarily required expulsion. And I think what Benny would say is, look, my point was that was an aspect that wasn't fundamental. And so they're disagreeing on like the relative importance or severity.
Yeah, but I think if you go back to the book, he's very strongly suggests it's fundamental. So I think it's an argument, but I think it's an argument that is contradicted by the evidence in the second chapter of the book. People can go and read it for themselves and see what they think.
That he wrote, right? And what do you think needs to? Where do you? My final question on this is: where do you think the gap that most people have in their understanding of this conflict or politics as a whole, like whether it's people you disagree with, what is the core fallacy or logical flaw that you think that they're making in their reasoning?
Generally, I think that people don't realize that the stories they tell, even when they're based on correct facts, miss out a whole bunch of other facts. So, like, you can tell a story of the founding of the state of Israel that is a very powerful and inspiring story. You could see it in Exodus, in the Exodus movie. It's really inspiring story that persecuted people come and found a new state and build something out of nothing. And you could tell the whole story and leave out the story of the occupation, the story of what it's like to live in the West Bank and not be able to get to the hospital if you're Palestinian. You can tell a story and leave out a huge part of the story and be factually correct in everything you've said, but miss a hugely important part of reality. I also think that's my disagreement with people who tell the story of American capitalism, the glories of American capitalism. You can tell a story about wonderful entrepreneurs who create interesting products and they build something out of nothing and they become great successes, and you can miss the story of all the workers in the third world who sewed the jeans for 6 cents an hour because they're just not they're not part of your story. but they're there. They're real. They're a real part of the story. I've written about the war in Vietnam and the way that the war in Vietnam can be told. The story can be told excluding entirely the perspective of the Vietnamese, essentially, of different Vietnamese people. So I've come to the conclusion that that's why a lot of people get deluded, is because they are like, well, all my facts are correct, and it's like, yes, but is there a giant part of reality? Are there a lot of people who you're just not talking to and just not getting? Like, you could tell the story of America without talking to any Indians, any Native Americans, right? You could tell, which a lot of U.S. history textbooks did for a long time. Like, you wouldn't get the voices of actual Native Americans in the textbook, but if you put the voices in, then it becomes suddenly the story is much more complex and difficult. So that I say is that I think is at the root of a lot of people's massively different interpretations of the world.
Is that we see what we see as facts and then paint a story.
You're a little sliver of the world.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, this is true. My little sliver is true. And it's like, yes, your little sliver is true, but your little sliver is not everything.
Yeah. And people fail to kind of see the bigger picture, to see both sides, to be willing to accept that.
Yeah. Which is why I read conservative arguments, by the way, because I know that they have facts that I haven't been told. Right. I read their books. I have a whole shelf of conservative books. Well, I read Benny Morris. I want to know, what facts would I not be told by a partisan on my side?
And in doing so, you're getting a more comprehensive view.
Yeah.
Such that you can be informed of like the flaws in either side and in either argument. And
yes.
Picture.
And I don't think it means you have to come down, straight in the middle. I still come down to very strong conclusions, but I certainly try and avoid saying things that are just propaganda, right? Or that miss a hugely important part of the story. And there are things that I think the left is, as I say, I'm very critical of Marxist authoritarian governments, for instance. And I think that in that case, too, people could tell a glorious story about the Soviet Union that misses the gulags. They tell a wonderful story. I mean, I've argued with Stalinists, and the story about Stalin they tell is the heroic story of beating Nazism, right? And Joseph Stalin, built the workers' state that beat back the tide of fascism. And that's a very heroic and powerful story. It just misses all of the horrors that are perpetrated by Stalin.
Oh, it's interesting. And I think it's a good reminder that people should really not just dig deep into the facts in front of them, but the facts that are not in front of them, and to see both perspectives and to read current affairs.
People who disagree with you.
Yeah. And I think the bottom line is to read current affairs.
Read current affairs. If you disagree with current affairs, read current affairs.
Yeah.
That's very important.
Awesome. So Nathan, thanks so much for the time.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Jay.
I'm going to end the recording. It'd be great if you and I could 2 minutes.
Yeah, I got like 2 minutes, but yeah.
Perfect.